The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SBDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
have the honor of facilitating the OAS LGBT.
El grupo central para el colectivo LGBTIQ+, para promover las conversaciones y reconocimiento y expansión de los derechos y el espacio para la comunidad LGBTIQ+. Es un gusto darles la palabra aquí, en esta mesa redonda híbrida que se llama Abriendo puertas, economías que crecen, los beneficios del desarrollo económico en las Américas. Esto ha sido organizado por
I would just like to maybe thank and point out a few specific contributors. First of all, I'd like to thank the OAS Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equality, SARE, whose steadfast support of the work of the core group has been essential in turning our shared goals into action, such as here today. SARE's efforts to facilitate and support this event demonstrates commitment to ensuring
la no discriminación y la equidad se encuentran en el centro de la agenda de la OEA. Deseamos agradecer también a la misión de los Estados Unidos por
a special envoy for the advancement of human rights of the LGBTQI plus persons. Jessica's leadership and tireless advocacy have been instrumental in driving progress for LGBTI plus rights, both here in the Americas, but also globally. 2025 is going to be an interesting year for all of us. It holds particular, I think, relevance for our region as we prepare for the OAS General Assembly in Antigua and Barbuda, and then later in the year, the Summit of the Americas, the 10th Summit of the Americas in the Dominican Republic. I think we are called on in particular to try to engage and collaborate in the Caribbean region on our issues to ensure space and thought and progress. This year also brings another important milestone. Washington, D.C. will welcome World Pride in June. World Pride offers a unique opportunity to highlight the progress made in advancing LGBTI plus rights in the Americas and to showcase the region as a leader in diversity and inclusion. And I know the core group is hoping to take advantage of that opportunity. We see this as an opportunity to deepen collaboration with the global community and reinforce our shared vision of equality and opportunity for all. The theme of today's roundtable, economic inclusion, is central to that vision. Inclusion is not simply a matter of fairness, it is an essential driver for innovation, resilience, and prosperity for all of us. The economic case for inclusion is well established. When everyone has an equal access to opportunities, we unlock potential, foster creativity, and strengthen our communities and our economies. And beyond the economic benefits, inclusion, of course, upholds the fundamental human dignity that are the foundations of the OAS and its mission. We are really fortunate today to have an extraordinary group of speakers and experts to share their insights and expertise in our reflection of the power of inclusion. Our keynote speaker will be Dr. M.V. Lee Baggett, who is a leader in demonstrating the economic costs of exclusion and the measurable benefits of inclusion. Her groundbreaking research has shared global conversations and shaped our minds in thinking about LGBTI plus economic empowerment. We're also honored today to have our panel guided by the expertise of Susan Goldberg, Senior Advisor and Legal Expert for the U.S. Department of State, who will provide, I'm sure, as always, leadership and insight into the whole global situation for LGBTI plus rights. I will let Susan introduce the very distinguished panel who will have discuss these issues, but I assure you we are in for a real treat. This discussion today is, of course, more about than identifying simply the challenges faced by inclusion of the LGBTI community in economic opportunities. It's also about finding solutions. We know that LGBTI plus individuals across the Americas face systemic barriers, from education to employment to accessing basic services. These challenges trap individuals in cycles of exclusion, limit their contributions to society, and deny their rights. The good news is, though, that solutions do exist. Solutions such as policies that promote equal treatment, programs that empower marginalized communities, and partnerships that amplify impact. To make solutions effective, we must also address critical gaps in data. Disaggregated data sounds very boring, sounds like something a bureaucrat like myself would talk about, but it is important because it is essential to understand the realities faced by the LGBTI plus community. Crafting evidence-based policies needs data, and tracking progress is essential to see the relevance of the actions that we're trying to undertake. Without accurate and inclusive data, we cannot fully measure the success, impact, or otherwise of our efforts. Canada remains committed, of course, to advancing this work. Through our federal 2S LGBTIQ plus action plan, we are working to dismantle systemic barriers and improve outcomes at home in Canada. And internationally, we are proud to partner with governments, civil society, and the private sector to promote inclusion and equity across the hemisphere. On behalf of the OAS LGBTI plus core group, I thank you for being here and participating in today's event, whether you're here in the room or online. Your engagement and expertise and commitment make progress possible. I'll repeat, your engagement makes progress possible. Together, we can promote economic inclusion, advance equality, and build a region where everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, has an opportunity to contribute and to thrive. So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to offer the floor to our keynote speaker, Dr. M.V. Lee Badgett. Dr. Badgett, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can indeed. So I pass the mic to you and look forward to your insights on the subject.
Thank you. Thank you. I have just a few slides. Well, I'm delighted to be here. And I want to start off by just asking, what does economic empowerment mean? And I want to start with this story about how we can actually create economic opportunities and economic power for LGBTI people. So this is a story about a woman named Maria. She's a transgender woman in a Latin American country who I interviewed for a research project. She was unemployed after she was transitioned, but she found a position with a social enterprise that hires transgender people to do IT, information technology work. They placed her in a temporary position as a data analyst with a very big, well-known company. And after she proved herself for a few months, they offered her a permanent position. So she was a success story for the social enterprise. So what impact did that success have on her life? Well, she now has a better job, she has higher pay, and she's soon going to have enough experience that she will get a promotion. She was able to afford to move out of her family's house. She now lives with her boyfriend. She has good health insurance that paid for her gender-affirming care and her therapist. She's now taking classes so that she can finish a university degree and increase her opportunities at work. So these are the kind of positive economic impacts on individuals that we hope will happen when we have a social enterprise or other project that works with LGBTI people to provide them with new skills and give them new opportunities. For individuals, this means a solid livelihood, money in the pocket, money in the bank, and that gives us the power to fulfill our personal life needs. But it goes beyond that too. Our communities gain as well. So Maria supports her friends through similar challenges. She teaches sometimes at this social enterprise. She's earned enough that she could hire a lawyer to take on a legal fight with her insurance company. That effort led to also to success and set a local precedent for equal treatment of transgender people where she lives. I can tell you stories from other LGBTI people and other economic empowerment programs that I've interviewed. They all talk about wanting to give back to their communities. When they have the opportunity, they hire other LGBTI people and they give them the same opportunities that they had. Many folks I've interviewed report that having a job and having a good income really changes how their families and even their larger communities see them and how they're treated. Bringing something to the table, as they often put it, leads to more respect and, frankly, power within their families. So I think this is an example, these are examples of what the achievement of economic empowerment looks like. These opportunities to earn a good livelihood are things that we hope for when we advocate for human rights. They're things that we often work toward when we advocate for non-discrimination laws. They're gains for individuals and they're gains for communities. And very importantly, I think what we see is that outcomes matter a lot along with the formal rights. In addition to those formal rights, and actually, to be frank, when we talk about economic empowerment in some countries, this is instead of formal rights. But in addition to human rights, we have other tools that can help improve the economic well-being of LGBTI people, like training in new skills, teaching and supporting someone to start a business, providing seed capital, maybe hiring them in social enterprises, working to create credit co-ops or other kind of worker-owned businesses. So there are many options that we have. However, there's always the however. We face a lot of challenges in doing this work. First, we know we have a lot of work to do. We know this because we're starting to get good statistics in many countries across the Americas. I have totally forgotten to advance my slides, but here we go. Thinking about this from the perspective of human rights, we know we have a lot of work to do because we're starting to get good statistics in many countries across the Americas, actually, that allow us to compare LGBTI people and cisgender heterosexual people. There's been a big effort to increase the quantity of data, as Chairperson Savage mentioned. In the US and Canada, we've had pretty good data for quite a while now, and we can very easily document the challenges that LGBTI people face: higher poverty rates, health disparities, discrimination in labor markets. And now we're starting to see similar inequalities looking farther south. We have good data in Mexico that show, just for example, how intersex people face health and economic disparities. Colombia has also expanded its collection of sexual orientation and gender identity related data, and we can see there how informal employment is much more common for LGBT people than for heterosexual people. We have a lot of data on same-sex couples in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Guatemala, Peru, Mexico, and Uruguay. And people analyzing those data are finding, for example, that people in same-sex couples are much less likely to own homes than are people in different sex couples. I'll just say the more data that we collect, the more we're learning about the contours of LGBTI people's lives, but also about the inequalities that they face. The data are new, but the story is not. But that's our first challenge. We have a lot to do. Secondly, again, just to repeat a point from Chair Savage, we're holding our economies back. If shared prosperity and the end of poverty and vibrant economies are what we're after, then we really can't afford to exclude LGBTI people and to lose what they have to offer: skills, knowledge, creativity, all these important aspects of what economists call human capital. Many studies have documented the connection between inclusion of LGBTI people and economic success for economies and for businesses. In many of these studies, we're kind of converging on a loss that's, in the percentage points. We're losing 1% or more in most countries to the lack of full inclusion of LGBTI people. And that's a loss that hits everybody, not just LGBTI people. So third, we're also learning that our efforts to promote economic empowerment are frankly meager compared to what the need is. The Global Philanthropy Project collects data on the amount of funding to LGBTI communities globally. And their most recent data showed that there was about $400 million of funding for LGBTI people outside the US. And out of that, it's not actually a terribly large number, only $18 million went to fund economic inclusion. That is actually over 2 years. So really in any given year, only about $9 million is funding economic inclusion for LGBTI people. That's kind of thinking about funding spent on food, on housing, on employment. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny drop in the bucket. If we thought about that as a form of economic development assistance going to LGBTI people, it is a share that is so small that I have to give it to you in pennies. It is 4 pennies out of every $100 spent on development assistance globally. Again, the proverbial drop in the bucket. And actually, I'll just say that percent since GPP started tracking this. We all have a lot more to do. Philanthropy, the development sector, businesses, the OAS. So what is it that we would do? What is that pathway to the future that we want to widen and extend? Well, let me say, it is a pathway that is already being mapped out now by LGBTI organizations. The most visible work has been with the corporate sector in North America. We see lots of organizations and internal employee groups working to push corporations, despite the current backlash that we're seeing in the U.S. In terms of DEI. We're still seeing lots of efforts by companies around the world being pushed by LGBT groups. We also have LGBT chambers of commerce in many countries, from Canada to Argentina. But we need a lot more than that. We need a lot more than that. So I want to finish up with just a snapshot of what that's already looking like. Part of the Americas. A study I did with some colleagues a few years ago where we looked at 88 economic empowerment programs around the world. We found that Latin America and the Caribbean had the highest percentage of those programs. 41% of them were in the LAC region. And they were, both low and middle income countries. We see many different kinds of strategies being used. Here's what a couple of them look like. Oops, I accidentally my great photo here. One is an example that's run by an organization called Micro Rainbow International. They do entrepreneurship training to create small business people out of folks who have maybe a side hustle or an informal gig, but to turn them into thinking about themselves as entrepreneurs with a business that can be expanded. They have offered this training 10 times over the last 8 or 9 years. More than 500 people have received this training, which has sometimes been in person, sometimes online. They learn about financial education, how to write a business plan, and when funding allows, they are offered seed capital to help start their business. A lot of what is characteristic of these programs that we see in particular in the Micro Rainbow program is the recognition that people who have lived the lives of LGBTI people with many challenges might also need some extra psychological support to get through a program. So that's a very important thing that we see there. This photo a couple years ago, and these small businesses that are created are showcasing some of the work that they do. Different kinds of businesses. But I want to, rather than talking a lot about the details, let's talk about what Micro Rainbow has found in terms of effects. They found higher incomes, people have more leisure time. As the person who created this program says, people are able to live their best lives with more time for themselves and with a higher income. They're able to pay off debts. They have more financial economy, more self-esteem and self-confidence. And the ones that I talked to really emphasized how they changed how they see themselves, not just as somebody with a side hustle or a hobby, but as somebody who is a business person or an entrepreneur. Another program that does impact investing in LGBTI-owned companies is the Dry Linden Foundation. They are a grant-making foundation, but they're using some of their assets to invest in companies in Mexico and in some other in Serbia, Kenya. They've also done some work in South Africa. But what they've been doing in Mexico is to try to develop an impact investing ecosystem where they have investment partners and partners in LGBTI civil society. They want projects that have a positive social impact, and they are assessed by folks from civil society along with the financial side of these investments. And they're developing the capacity to give technical assistance, mentoring, coaching and training to folks who are starting these businesses. They've got different levels of businesses, from very small micro incubation loans to much larger loans. And even now they're experimenting with loans to larger companies that are not LGBTI specific, but that commit to specific milestones for inclusion and equity for all groups of employees, including in particular LGBTI people, but for other groups as well. And they're finding so far that they have fairly high payback rates. Finally, we also are starting to see some very inclusive policy practices. I mentioned the data collection. I love this map because it shows it almost every country in Latin America, not so much in the Caribbean, but they're starting to actually collect data on LGBTI people, which is an important step to knowing what the needs are and how well we are meeting those needs as time goes on. There are 2 countries that have implemented very innovative employment quotas for transgender people. That would be Argentina and Uruguay. Both of them had quotas of 1% of public employment jobs. Many people have gotten good jobs as a result of this. So there are lots of future pathways here to build out. There are lots of other partners that we can bring in, whether it's the multilateral development banks. IDB in particular has been, not surprisingly, very focused on Latin America and the Caribbean, and bilateral agencies, the World Bank. A growing number of civil society organizations have emerged, like my own, to work on these questions of economic development. But we have a lot to do, and we're going to need to work together if we want to undo the past harms, to find effective and scalable ways to fully include the very creative and hardworking community of LGBTI people in all of our economies and in our societies. Thank you.
Professor Badgett, thank you so much for that really important keynote that shared with us breadth and depth across the Americas. We are grateful for your research. We are grateful for your insight and sharing your time, sharing your expertise. Thank you so much. On behalf of the LGBTI core group here at OAS, we appreciate your time. Now, it's my pleasure to jump in and introduce a panel that will follow up from this conversation so far. And I want to begin to frame the panel by referring to the title of this roundtable: "Opening Doors, Growing Economies: The Benefits of Economic Development in the Americas." I think Ambassador Savage opened us up, really laying this out well, really making clear the linkage between opening doors and growing economies. That is, that when we have open doors, when each person in a society can participate in the economy to their fullest potential, including LGBTI people, what we find is that economies thrive, right? There's the negative story, which is that there are real and serious costs to discrimination. And there is the positive story that fully inclusive economies without these kinds of discrimination mean that societies do better, communities do better, nations do better, the global economy does better. And so with jumping off from your foundation, Ambassador Savage, and from Professor Badgett's remarks, we'd like to jump into this panel discussion. And I should have introduced myself. I'm Suzanne Goldberg. I am here as a senior advisor and legal expert on behalf of the Special Envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons at the U.S. Department of State, where I also serve as a senior advisor to the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights. And as a point of personal privilege, I am an appointee of this administration, so I will be saying my goodbyes at the end of the week, and am grateful for the partnership of everybody here at OAS, and especially colleagues in the core group. Okay, so here's the panel. We've talked about the title. The purpose, obviously, is to jump in and understand through the expertise and insights of our panelists what exactly are the barriers to opening doors, and then what concretely can be done to nudge a door open and to keep it open or open it wider. And the issue and the opportunity, I think, and what I've asked our panelists to do is to be as concrete as possible, because the goal here is that everybody in the room should be able to take away new tools, either for direct use or, more likely, because circumstances vary across the Americas, to think about how can these be adapted for use wherever you are. And I ask everybody in the room and online to take this question very seriously. What are you going to walk away with? What are you going to do with the information you hear today? And look forward to your questions. So what's our format? I will pose 2 questions to our panelists, each of them sequentially, and I've asked them to be lightning fast and very deep and broad in their responses. Each a few minutes to the first question, a little bit more expansive when we come to the particulars of concrete action steps. And as I have also shared with them, because we're on a tight timetable, I will jump in if needed. I'll be keeping time over here. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists, and I will introduce them as I pose questions to them. So first, we will start with Christian Landeta. Are our panelists here? Terrific. Who is the Undersecretary for Diversity, the Ministry of Women and Human Rights in Ecuador. And we're so pleased to have you here. And so let me turn to you, and then I will ask everybody essentially the same question, which is, what are the challenges we're up against when we think seriously about the inclusion of LGBTI+ persons in the economy? So from your vantage point, can you describe 1 or 2 significant barriers that prevent LGBTI persons from participating fully in their communities and their nation's economies? Over to you, Christian.
Buenos días con todos. Buenos días con todos.
Good morning, everyone from Ecuador. For Ecuador and for the Undersecretary on Diversity within the Ministry of Women and Human Rights, we believe that one of the main barriers is for the visibility of the population, of our population, is to have the data in our country. Not to have official data of this population makes it very difficult to identify properly public policy for LGBT plus persons. In 2022, Ecuador carried a population survey and household survey, and it was the first experience in our country where we include the variables of sexual orientation and gender identification, where we're able to identify whether there were 279 people in Ecuador who identify themselves as LGBT+, representing 2.4% of the population. However, this survey and that census, population census, allows us to identify that out of this population, 25.24% do not find employment, they don't have a job. This makes us understand that there is no doubt when there is no clear public policy, that means that they don't have a clear view of the realities that that population is facing. Furthermore, and another barrier is the lack of access to education for those populations, especially trans population, who are the most visible person but have very little access to within the health system that faces discrimination and a government that is focusing on other population. Those barriers does not allow us to move ahead in public policies geared to those populations.
So informal, I should refer to you as Undersecretary Landeta. So my apologies, and thank you for those important insights. And I want to pull two of them quickly, which is one, you have underscored the point about data and the importance of data to inform public policy that Ambassador Savage raised. And second, the point about barriers to education. Coming from an education background myself, I can personally underscore that when people do not have an opportunity to thrive in an educational environment, or even to be able to stay safely in an educational environment, it makes it near impossible to develop the skills and the aptitude for participating fully in the workforce. So let me now turn to one of our colleagues who's in person, our special rapporteur on the economic, social, and cultural environmental rights in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We're so pleased to have you here, Javier Palomo Lantes. And the question is the same for you from your perspective. What are one or two significant barriers that really interfere with the full economic participation of LGBTI plus persons?
Thank you very much, Susan. I will answer in Spanish too.
Well, I think that the first barrier and the most significant one faced by LGBTQ plus persons to participate in the economies is structural discrimination in the labor market specifically, which is something that is characteristics of a lot of our societies. And this means that there is bias, and it makes it impossible to access formal work, and also keeps the population to access recognized and good employment. And this is very serious in Latin America and the Caribbean, where the informal employment rates are already very high for the whole population in general, which means that for this specific population, the percentages are even higher, even more serious situation that they're facing. In addition to this, we find that this structural discrimination causes difficulties when it comes to having access to different inclusive selection processes and certain different, and this leads to a problem that it perpetuates the economic exclusion and inclusion in general when it comes to social rights, such as the right to social security. And this affects particularly this population especially when they reach an age, when they come to the retirement age. The other barrier, which is very significant, has to do with access to social and economic rights, and also educational rights, as it was mentioned, but also access to health services, because the difficulties to have to focused health rights to those people have an impact on their well-being, and this idea of discriminating them based on their identity by the health systems obviously affects the ability to contribute to the economies of the country. So those are only a few of the challenges that they face. Thank you.
So much, Special Rapporteur. You have added a number of important points to the conversation just now. I'll again pull out two. One, your point about structural discrimination, right? It's not enough to say that an individual should be able to participate. The question is, will the structures and the policies and the accountability measures, I'm sure others will raise those as well, be available to enable the doors to open, to continue the metaphor from the event, the discussion title, and also stay open, and what happens when the doors shut. So there are issues of structural discrimination. You also pointed to high unemployment rates, which links back to Undersecretary Landetta's observation or sharing of a statistic that over 25% of LGBTI persons, I think that it was referred to LGBTI persons, in Ecuador are unemployed. Right, that's an extraordinary data point. And you made an additional point, which is quite important, which is that employment and participation in the economy is not sort of a lane that doesn't connect with others in terms of both what happens when people retire or get to an age where they ought to be able to retire with social supports, and can individuals who are in the workforce stay healthy and be able to participate fully from the vantage point of their health if they don't have access to health care for reasons of discrimination. All right, so we have a lot of barriers, a lot on the table. We're going to hear some more from our other experts, and then I promise we will get to some concrete steps. So let me turn now to Faye Johnstone, Executive Director and co-owner of Wisdom to Action. We're thrilled to have you here. And let me also pose to you, if you're there, I think I see you now, the same question, which is, from your vantage point and areas of expertise, what do you see as the significant barriers to full participation in the economy by LGBTI plus persons?
Absolutely, and thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. As mentioned, my name is Faye Johnson. I use she and they pronouns. I'm joining from Ottawa, Canada. I am a transgender woman, a small business owner, as well as an advocate. So my remarks will touch on both elements of those latter two pieces. I think first, I mean, we know this, but there's the historical stigma and longstanding inequalities that make it harder for queer and trans communities to participate in the workforce. And that legacy, while it's not generational in the same way that it might be for other communities, I think is still a narrative that young queer and trans people bring when they go into workplaces where we're not expecting to be supported, welcomed, mentored, or able to thrive. I think that legacy means that we are often the first, the only, and new. And so that means that there's particular burdens on us, and workplaces are often adjusting to our existence in their spaces. And for trans and gender diverse folks in particular, that creates a particular burden on members of our communities and results in experiences of exclusion. And then we have in those workplaces the ongoing realities of workplace discrimination, employment discrimination, having to deal with questions about bathroom usage, deal with questions about your medical histories, about your personal lives, and navigating that. I think often organizations, from corporations to nonprofits, have a lack of buy-in and genuine understanding around what diversity, equity, and inclusion means when it comes to queer and trans communities. We have a lack of mentorship and support for queer and trans folks in the workplace. Often, as a trans woman who's often the only trans woman in spaces, there aren't folks like me in those environments. And unfortunately, we often will mentor those who we have something in common with, who we see ourselves in. And when you don't have trans folks in executive board leadership positions, those new young trans employees don't often have access to the same kind of mentorship that others might. I think there's also a lack or an evolution in evidence-based interventions. There's the stuff we do that makes us feel good and that throws a rainbow sticker onto a bathroom or onto an entrance space or an entry door. But we don't always have tangible evidence-based interventions that we know and that we have evidence will show increase market participation, increase opportunities for trans and gender diverse people. And then I think there is a concerning space, if we come back to that historical stigma, what happens when that is reinvigorated? We are in an environment where there's a global anti-gender backlash. And when that scrutiny that is long-standing is weaponized, is accelerated, I think it creates a context where it's harder for trans people who have just begun engaging in many traditional work environments after a long history of not being allowed in that front door. It reinforces that burden and creates a lot of uncertainty around, am I allowed to be myself? Can I show up as myself? And then when you have, that latent or that social environment, it means that we actually are more likely to face a disadvantage when we're in a workplace because of potential treatment from clients, colleagues, and others. My last piece would be, I think we have a gap in how we talk about this issue. Gender and sexual diversity, economic development in the workplace is understood as a nice to have, a feel good. We want to do it because we love those queer and trans folks, and they deserve all of the same things as everybody else. As the host and opening keynote alluded to, there is an economic cost to not doing this work, and we see it in higher turnout in emergency rooms, higher rates of homelessness. Greater economic precarity means less economic potential is fulfilled. And so we need to tell that story. So it's not just the nice thing to do, it is core to our business model. And we need to be ready to bring that case to the public so that this isn't understood as something political, but is genuinely about creating a more robust, healthy, prosperous economy for everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really, really helpful and broad, and again, adding more breadth and depth to our conversation. I'll just do the same and pull out a couple of key points. And one is your point that we don't go to work in a vacuum, right? We go to work in a social environment. The history of how LGBTI people have been treated and are treated makes a difference, as does the surrounding social and political environment in which people go to work, as does the fact that LGBTI persons are a minority group and a small minority group. And in particular, you were talking about trans individuals who are often the first and only. And what does that mean? And what does that mean in terms of access to mentors, in terms of the kinds of concrete steps, and I'm sure, again, we'll talk about this as we continue the conversation, that are crucial to thriving in a workplace. Okay, lots to come back to, but next we will turn for some additional perspective to Kenita Placide. Kenita, are you there? We're not seeing you on the screen, but I hear you're online. Excellent. Hi, Kenita. So Kenita Placide is the founder and executive director of ECADE, and I neglected to have the full explanation. Oh, here we go. I thought I didn't have my accurate explanation of the acronym. The founder and executive director of the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, and a leader on LGBTI issues in the Caribbean. So let me turn the question over to you. Specifically, what are one or two barriers that you see to full participation of LGBTI people in the workforce and in the economy?
Present, good morning, good afternoon to some of you. It's really a pleasure being here, and thank you for having me. I think when we have looked at the work over the period of time, and I mean, we are now, and it feels like 2025 just started, but it feels like almost a few months into 2025. I don't know if people felt like they came into the year working and just pushing through, and it feels like a few months have gone through, even if it's only a couple of days in. That's certainly the feeling right now. But when we look at the work that has been done in the region, the Caribbean region is one where we can see, I think, individuals, when we look at citizens of a country, participation in economic and development issues are probably an easy thing to do if you take off the LGBT label. And I say that because once people have the assumption of your sexual orientation or gender identity, then you begin to have that type of pushback. Just a few years ago, Open for Business did the study that was looking at the exclusion in the Caribbean, the cost of exclusion. And I think Professor Badgett could probably give, and she spoke to this in terms of why is it between Latin America and Caribbean, you are seeing some 41% of the DEI processes happening to kind of get people to that point. So when we look at what is really hindering the LGBT community, is simply because of a fear of the unknown. Sexual orientation, although mostly done in the global north, you have seen that for Latin America and Caribbean, within the last 2 decades, we really have seen quite a bit of work. But for the Caribbean, it really has been within the last decade in terms of the visibility of the issue. So the mileage we have done on the term of sexual orientation, or probably just generally homosexuality, is not the same mileage we have done on the issue of trans. So although now we can count in many of our jurisdictions where the conversation really and truly on sexual orientation is more palatable, we can see it coming into policies and laws. We are not necessarily seeing the same token being given. And I deliberately use the word token here because this is where I think in a lot of our countries, there is the excuse of not fully understanding gender identity. Hence, more often than not, it is left out. We have seen quite a bit of movement within, particularly the Caribbean, within the last 2 years, because we have seen the strategic litigation really pushing through and widening those gaps to say, let's make this buggery law in our books unconstitutional. But this does not necessarily indicate that society at large is changing their position. And I say that because change of policy is not necessarily equal to change of hearts and minds.
Kenita, that is a great point on which I will gently jump in. Um, and thank you for your comments, and we'll be coming back to you on some of the solutions shortly, or the concrete steps. I do want to again pull out a couple of points from your commentary, which was superb, as with our other panelists. One, you referred to the fear of the unknown. And one of the, I think, one way also to think about that point is when LGBTI people come into the workplace, is this a group that's looked at as just having a one dimension of identity, sort of a flat human being, not a three-dimensional person, and the only thing that is seen is the stigmatized identity, rather than a full person with a range of skills, whether professional or otherwise, and a range of just real life interests, family memberships, interest in sports, music, and sort of a full person. But when a person is reduced to one aspect of their identity, it becomes much harder to open the door and keep the door open, because we hold the door open for people, not for identities, typically. Second, you talked about the way in which policy doesn't necessarily change experience on the ground, and the question of how to narrow that gap, that there is often a gap, even when there is good policy, and certainly when there are challenging policies or laws, like criminal sodomy laws that criminalize same-sex sexual relations. That also creates an environment, or can create an environment, that makes it much more difficult for LGBTI people to be viewed as fully human. So you've given us a lot more to think about. Thank you very much. And yet I suspect there are still more barriers that we're about to hear about. So let me turn the podium over to Gabrielle de la Cruz Soler, who is the Manager of Global Impact Programs for Out and Equal, and add some more barriers for us. I would say both please and unfortunately.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to switch to Spanish.
Thank you so much for your invitation. I am Gabrielle de la Cruz. I am Peruvian, I'm gay. I got married in Texas 4 years ago because Peru doesn't recognize same-sex marriage. My pronouns are he, him. I find barriers in my day-to-day life, but we also look for solutions, and the private sector has been an ally. But to identify barriers in the job market, we made our research in Latin America, in 3 countries, to identify barriers when the LGBTI community is already part of the labor market. And I wanted to share with you 7 pieces of data. First, people are coming out at the workplace. If we compare the situation in Chile 5 years ago, only 30% of individuals are out whereas more it's over 60%. However, more than 50% LGBTI individuals say that they are transphobic and jokes against same-sex couples, gays and lesbians. Workers also point out that they do not know whether by pointing out discrimination behavior, their managers or human resources leaders will hear them out. There's fear where it comes to sharing these experiences. 4 out of 10 LGBTI individuals in the workplace suffer violence because of their gender identity or sexual orientation. 4 out of 10. Those who do report those behaviors, about 80% of them, they are not satisfied with the way in which the situations were addressed. When we think about leadership, and someone was mentioning the issue of mentoring and how good it is if you find someone, for example, someone trans in a leadership position. We see it's mostly gay men in leadership positions. So within the LGBTI community, there are also barriers. Most of the leaders are gays, 20% are lesbian, and it's a very small number of trans individuals who achieve a leadership position. For trans individuals, the job experience in Latin America, well, those jobs last between 6 and 11 months, given the level of violence they have to face on a daily basis. Thank you.
So much. These are really more excellent points. And again, I'll pull a couple of out, but really want to say that I would appreciate everybody not feeling completely depressed by all of these challenges, because we are soon going to jump into action items. And so, you've offered us a lot, and 2 points I'll pull out from your remarks are, first, this serious question about when people face discrimination or harassment in the workplace because of their sexual orientation or gender identity or expression or sex characteristics, what happens? Right? First, are people willing to report? Is the fear too great? Second, if people do report, is there a serious response? And you told us that often there's not, at least not from the perception of the person reporting. And third is, I'll just add, a real risk in reporting incidents or risk or fear of retaliation. What happens? Both formal and then informal, including social exclusion from full workforce participation. You also pointed out that not everyone who is LGBTI plus has the same experience, right? That can vary by sexual orientation and gender identity. Lesbians may have different experiences than gay men, or bisexuals, transgender persons, different experiences from cisgender persons. And of course, those experiences are all cross-cut and varied by race, by ethnicity, by class, by education level, by being rural or urban or suburban, by being indigenous, by many by having a disability, many factors that shape any individual person or group's experience in the workplace. Okay. So lots of challenges, and now I'm pleased to bring us to the point in the conversation where we are going to talk about what can be done. And again, I would remind you of the questions I asked you to consider in this part of the discussion, which is, what tools can you use? And when I say you may be in a position where you can actually implement some of these tools. You may be in a position where you can think about adapting. And certainly everybody is in a position, everybody here today, both in person and online, is in a position where you can think about, how can I share this information with others and make sure that we do all we can to lift up the learning and insights from our experts. So Undersecretary Landeta, let me turn back to you, if you are there. I see you there, to ask you this question of what What are some actionable solutions? I know we don't have a lot of time, but at least in a couple of minutes, if you can share with us some concrete steps from your perspective, and especially since you are in government, think about how do governments make these steps meaningful rather than just symbolic? Over to you.
Undoubtedly, the fact that sometimes we are invisible, that was a negative measure. In Ecuador, homosexuality used to be a crime. When this stopped being the case, there started to be greater visibility. So one of the big measures is to give us visibility. In Ecuador, there is a specific unit under the umbrella of the human rights area, and they carry out monitoring and assessment of national public policy. First recommendation then, visibility within a specific level of the state. Second, data generation. If we cannot identify how many of us there are and what the daily life of LGBTI people are, it's a problem because measures are implemented based on ideas coming out of a desk rather than real experiences. Third, it is important to have data on gender identity, sexual orientation to incorporate at every function of the state sexual orientation and gender identity variables so as to provide better services and provide better access to those services, targeting this to populations that have traditionally been invisible. We have a historical debt vis-a-vis the trans community. 37.8 of individuals in our national survey that identify themselves as LGBTI plus persons are still in poverty. The government needs to coordinate with social organizations to implement programs or activities that will allow us to encompass these populations that have always been excluded at the Ministry of Women and Human Rights. Since 2024, we've been implementing a program called Program to Strengthen Economies Without Discrimination, aimed at women and the LGBTI plus community. This not only gives this community greater visibility, it also gives access to a population that was considered within other populations, but not by itself. We've had 1,000 individuals who were part of the LGBTI plus community who took part in the program this year. We see that there is lots of interest in being part of our programs, and they also want to strengthen their economic systems. We have a network of popular and solidary economy, and our trans members are essential in our craft development area. We are working with the Ministry of Education, which is the one that deals with secondary education and also with tertiary institutions, so that LGBTI plus individuals can have all the same access without discrimination towards anyone because of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Thank you. You gave us so many really actionable items that I know you are leading on personally and across the government, and we're grateful to hear about them. Again, I'll point out a few. One is the importance of naming the group, the visibility point you were making, because it turns out that a lot of people would like to say inclusion for all, economic inclusion for all, but particularly for groups that are less visible, which would include LGBTI people. It also often includes people with certain disabilities. But if in the case of the LGBTI persons, if the group isn't named, it's not clear, first of all, that there's buy-in to keep that door open, and it's also not clear that anybody will recognize the steps that need to be taken. You pointed to data generation and incorporating data. I want to add this sort of underside to that, which is devoting the resources that enable the data generation and collection and analysis and incorporation. And you pointed to programs because, of course, none of us jumps into the economy on our own, right? It all requires training. It requires training for employers. It requires training for the participants in economic life. So thank you very much. And what I want to just share some hot off the presses or soon to be off the presses news from my colleagues at USAID, which is that this week USAID will publicly release a sectoral guidance report called Integrating LGBTQI+ Communities into Economic Growth Programming. So look out for this report because it is based on more than 90 key informant interviews in 16 countries in 5 regions, including Latin America and the Caribbean. And the guidance provides an overview of challenges and also builds on some of these concrete steps that we were just talking about. So please look out for that. All right, Special Rapporteur Lantes, it's Palumno Lantes. Let me turn this question to you. You have a unique vantage point as a Special Rapporteur for the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. What concrete steps do you see that colleagues who are in attendance today might think about taking or sharing or adapting?
Thank you so much for this question. There are at least 2 paths to consider from a public policy outlook. On the one hand, this means that there need to be practical solutions which require awareness-raising programs aimed at public policies and private policies. There is a Brazilian program that reached 24 companies with different companies. Awareness-raising campaigns. And these have been trainings of huge importance. Besides its type of activities aimed at awareness raising and training, another aspect that several countries have implemented has had to do with passing specific regulations linked to affirmative policies. We've heard examples about these affirmative policies. We could consider implementing this typically for the public sphere, activities for the private sphere. These actions need to be supported with active anti-discrimination policies to punish discriminatory behaviors, giving rise to inclusive workplaces. The set of activities, awareness raising, educational activities, affirmative action, and non-discriminatory policies, these are the pathways that have shown usefulness to lead to social transformation. Something to be taken into account is that if there are specific bylaws to protect specific groups of workers, the non-discriminatory protection, the protection for LGBTIQ+ workers have to be at the same level as the protections already provided by other groups of workers. This is a way in which we can think about the design of these protections. Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thank you.
You've made, thank you, Special Rapporteur. You have made, again, a number of important points, and we, appreciate them very much coming from your vantage point of focus on economic participation in your rapporteur, as part of your rapporteurship. One of your points is, what does this look like in action? Right, so some of the work looks like working directly with companies. I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about this. But again, not everyone magically knows how to create an inclusive workplace, right? It takes work, it takes training. And I hearken back as I think about this to a prior LGBTI core group roundtable and technical dialogue on law enforcement and LGBTI communities. And what we talked about there was, again, officers may be told to respect the public, but they don't automatically know how to do it with every member of the public. And training is essential, and standard operating procedures are essential. It's not different in other kinds of workplaces. So getting on the ground, as in that example of Brazil and 24 companies there. Another key point you made is that referring back to your point earlier about structural discrimination, what is needed in an environment that will default to structural discrimination? One crucial piece is policy, right? Because what does policy do? It sets the guidelines, it sets the expectations, it provides the cornerstone that leadership can go to and say, this is our policy, these are our commitments. And of course, there's implementation, but without policy, what is there to implement? So policy is another key piece. And then that gives us a great opportunity to pose the same question to Faye Johnstone, again, Executive Director and co-owner of Wisdom to Action. Faye, can you tell us from your perspective of some concrete steps that you have participated in or you have seen that have been effective in creating inclusive work environments and inclusive economic participation for LGBTI persons?
Absolutely. I have a few examples from our federal government here in Canada. The first of which I would say is our 2S LGBTQI+ National Action Plan, which has some components that are focused on economic development, but is packaging those within a broader, a plan intended to accelerate equality for queer and trans communities. And one component to that I like to highlight is that ensures that we're not just doing pieces in different corners, that there is a strategy that they integrate with one another and bolster each other. But one particular investment that was made was funding to support our National Queer and Trans Chamber of Commerce to invest into SLGI+ entrepreneurship in partnership with civil society organizations. So concrete mentorship, opportunities to network and meet other queer and trans business owners. We know because of historic market exclusion that many queer and trans people are creators, they are artists, they're creating and building their own companies. And these kinds of interventions help scale and grow so they don't run up against the glass ceiling. Separately, I would say there's the work of modeling inclusion in our government bodies and in our federal public services. Those efforts often will actually trickle out to the private sector. We've seen a ton of leadership in our federal public service around inclusivity for trans and gender diverse people, gender neutral bathrooms, HR policies. And we've seen a real process where those have become more normalized and mainstreamed because of government involvement as they trickle out to the private sector. I think an area that I would like to focus on, a good chunk of my own work is doing the education with workplaces of all sorts, from factories to fisheries to schools and universities. And I think there is value in how we approach the work. Often people are scared to ask questions, they're scared to say the wrong thing. So we need an approach that is candid, that is common sense, and that is practical, so that people don't just have this as an abstract concept, but they have the ability to ask their questions, to be uncertain, to be vulnerable, and to ask the wrong or to answer those questions in the wrong way. But then we need leadership within organizations in the government, public and private sectors to model that inclusivity, to bring forward, as was referred to, the policies that ensure we are addressing discrimination and addressing hostility for queer and trans people. But as I alluded to in my initial remarks, I think the story here also matters a ton. I think there is a risk that we misunderstand trans and gender diverse identity and the broader queer community. But in particular, the story of our community is one best understood by a broke factory worker in a gig economy, barely making ends meet, and doing all they can to support themselves and their family. And that story of economic growth, of struggle, of overcoming barriers, I think can broaden the story to not just to be about a feel good, but it does, reach hearts and minds and ties into a broader narrative of we want economies where everyone can thrive, can support themselves, their families, and their loved ones. So those are just some pieces. I think there's a lot of leadership in opportunity for government leadership. We're doing some work in Canada to update our Employment Equity Act, but the support for entrepreneurs, in particular, tailored interventions for different segments of the queer and trans community, in particular, again, I would highlight trans and gender diverse communities, is, I think, pivotal to this. We need to understand those nuances. Experience of a trans entrepreneur is going to be very different from that of a cisgender gay entrepreneur. And when we can understand that, I think we can more effectively address some of the disparities within the rainbow umbrella itself. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. You've added some many really important points. I'll pull out a few. One, you talked about resourcing partnerships between the Chamber of Commerce and communities. And I think it's a great example of learning doesn't happen magically. And expertise is shared, right? Each of us is an expert on our own lives and our own experiences. And where we learn and where we grow is when there are opportunities that are really created and supported for whether it's networking or conferences or convenings or conversations like this one. This is actually how foundations and insights are developed to bring into the workplace. You talked in your barriers portion and now about sort of how do workplaces get navigated, and in particular for trans persons, access to bathrooms, access to health insurance. What does this look like? If nothing is said, then people don't know. So there's the question of both having policies and then having leadership explain those policies. Also, you made the point that lots of people are worried about saying the wrong thing. Not everybody, but a lot of people don't want to offend their colleagues. And so how to create spaces in which people can ask questions, can learn, cannot be penalized for learning, and at the same time, an environment is created in which all persons can thrive. Much more to say. I guess one last point that you've made twice, and and others have made as well, that I want to underscore is, this whole conversation falls into the category of need to, not nice to. I mean, of course it's nice to not discriminate against people. Of course it's nice to have an inclusive environment. It also turns out that there are serious economic upsides to creating an inclusive workplace, inclusive work environments, inclusive economies, and serious economic downsides to not doing so. So Kenita Plessy, who is again, founder and executive director of ECADE, the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality. Kenita, talk with us about some concrete steps that you have seen be effective. I know you've been involved with many.
I think I just want to kind of acknowledge some of the interventions already made by my colleagues before, because I think all of those are very important. The interventions with different stakeholders within country. Thinking about this, it's basically doing sensitization on LGBT, acronyms, individuals, situations, from government level all the way down to even society itself, using media to be able to bring out some of those messages, doing campaigns that continuously humanizes LGBT folks, because this is something we continuously have to do. Even with campaigns, when we speak about this particularly, you think about how I am a lawyer. Yes, I may be queer, but the first thing is I'm a lawyer. I'm a nurse. I'm a sales clerk. I'm a professional, but I'm also queer. It's not a matter of wearing queer first or wearing gay first or lesbian first. And I think these, as long as people are comfortable and safe, they can be out. But we are also dealing with communities and countries where to be out is not a safe thing. But how do we allow for people to continuously participate? I have seen that being able to be done by getting governments to have more commitment. But even more so, the power within most of our countries do not lie within government. It lies in the private sector, the companies who actually drive that economic development of most countries. And I think getting more companies on board, and I know right now DEI is under major attack in many places, but we have to continue. We have to continue pushing through, understanding that we are fighting for equality and justice. We are actually fighting for life. Just to be able to be a participant in everyday society as every other citizen. So that requires companies who are in the global north, who is out there spreading pride and supporting pride, but in the Caribbean, they are silent. It's almost like it does not exist. But they do have an opportunity to connect with LGBT organizations and change that, push against the barriers. And I think there are a number of ways of doing this, not just with policy. Policy is one, and we are looking at policy in terms of amendments of inclusion, amendments to ensure justice is served, but there's also the economic factor. How is everybody surviving? And how we can survive is by providing the opportunities, ensuring our education systems are not biased and are available to every single person who can get there, getting the private sector to also step up, not just with the human resources policies, the standard of operating procedures also matter, but also how they also give back to society generally in every single country, and not necessarily picking out what they feel it is safer. We don't get where we need to get by taking easy tracks. Sometimes we have to really straddle through hard tracks to get through it, and private sector needs to work hand in hand with civil society organizations, battling that battle and bringing government on board. And Susan, back to you. I'll leave it here.
Kenita, thank you so much. You have, as you always do, added very important points to the conversation. I want to spotlight, right, this isn't just one sector, right? The economy, what makes up the economy? I mean, that was a question that Professor Badgett sort of offered us at the start. What are the components, or as sociologists or public health colleagues might ask us, when we do a root cause analysis, where are the sources of the challenge that we need to go back and think about? And because those usually hold the sources of solution, right? Government is a key actor. It is not the only actor. And as you said, many people are in business for themselves. Many people are not, right? Many people work in a workforce, are employed by others. So what are the employers doing? And you make the point, Kenita, of, large employers have an outsized impact because they set standards that other employers follow. They either are desirable or undesirable workplaces, and others look to them often to see what they are doing. Some companies have been very outspoken on pride, but only in some places, as you point out. And it's an interesting question, I think, for everybody in attendance today to think about that, that kind of unevenness or possible unevenness, and what kinds of engagements might be done to address some of that. And I suspect our next speaker may say something about that. And you also, Kenita, added the fundamental point, which is, at the end of the day, some of us, are privileged to sort of really enjoy what we do and find pleasure in our work. But work is also about survival. And it is also about how to have basic means to have food, have shelter. In some countries, it's the source of access to healthcare. In some countries, not, because that comes from the government. In some countries, it is the source of access to any protection in retirement, right? Any savings for retirement, or later in life, or disability if somebody becomes disabled while working. So lots of challenges, and they're quite serious, as you have underscored for us. But also lots of concrete steps that can be taken, including, I think very importantly, as you said, civil society and employer partnerships, which are not only about sort of inside the workplace, but also about large companies and small companies working with civil society and with communities. So I think that you're a terrific person to turn to on this concrete steps question. Gabrielle de la Cruz Soler, again, Manager of Global Impact Programs at Out and Equal. Your thoughts?
Muchas gracias. Es importante que recordemos que las empresas.
Thank you very much. Yes, very important to remember that private and social and civil society are very important actors, but also the companies and also they have a leading voice in the market. So countries are focusing their efforts and to see how we can train and educate all those people in the private sector on the diversity issues. Even in Peru, in the Ministry of Peru, there is a working group to work with the private sector in involving vulnerable groups within the companies and enterprises as a whole. This is important because in some of the countries, the political changes have brought about some delays and setbacks to some communities, as it happened in the case of Argentina, and that some companies, after the president of Argentina said that it was not allowed to use non-binary language within the public sector, or that we're not allowed to talk to non-binary people. Many of those companies that are already trained and educated and they already became part of many groups, such as the Chamber of Commerce, that started to say no. In fact, we're going to work hard on education as to on how we're going to address our non-binary workers. And it was a political response within the companies to what was happening in the country. So this is important. And the second point is that people that are coming into the private sector are expecting their leaders or CEOs to talk about those issues. They have certain expectations that they have a say on those issues about diversity, but we're beginning to see that leaders are very fearful to talk about LGBTQ plus issues. And these are things that are usually should be so simple to talk about. But as Dr. Badgett mentioned, it's something that gets everybody's attention. And there is a business case here that we can bring about. So let's take a look at how those workers are thinking about what their needs are. So let us try to promote for more leaders to talk about more LGBT issues, and also not only to support them along their careers so that somehow they can feel that they have an opportunity within their businesses or in their workplace, and that will help them grow, not only to the benefit, it benefits the company and it benefits the community as a whole and the country at the end of the day.
Very much, Gabrielle. And I again, these are, you point out that none of this is done by anyone alone, right? The partnership means also talking with employees. What do they need, and potential employees? What do they need? What do they want? What are their concerns? And that kind of exchange is what enables each other to learn from the lived experience and also come up with better policies, better implementation. Unfortunately, some companies are working in the opposite direction, and then that raises questions, I think, as you pointed out, for how to intervene. What can governments do? What can civil society do? And others. And finally, you underscore the business case, right? As a human rights person, of course, and a civil rights person, I care about non-discrimination as for its own sake. But I am always reminded that even if that's not what motivates you, right? The economic case, the business case, is really open and shut when it comes to creating inclusive workplaces. Now, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to open the floor first to core group members to see if anyone would like to offer a brief intervention, and then I hope we'll have a moment for a question or two from civil society, and I'm just going to prepare our panelists that I think you'll be limited to about 1 minute for any concluding remarks in response to interventions. But first, let me open to core group colleagues to see if you'd like to intervene. Great, thank you. Mexico, we'll begin with you.
Gracias, muy bueno.
Thank you so much, and good morning. Good morning, everyone. In the case of Mexico, we simply want to share some good experiences. We agree that it is indispensable to have reliable data, and that's why we wanted to recall a policy that Mexico has been implementing since 2022, which is the survey that took place in August in 2022, which is the National Survey on Gender Diversity. This survey is a major effort by the country, and it's a very positive experience in the region. We understand that collecting data on sexual and gender identity represents lots of challenges, not only because of the social prejudices and the difficulty that these communities have to discuss openly what they're facing, but also had to be politically correct to not only, and also to pose the question in the right way. And it has been said, this is a survey that is available to all the countries and all public agencies and entities that are interested, so we can share this experience, and on the basis of that, we can build and collect better data at the regional level. And secondly, we would like to share that in Mexico, we have implemented the standard and non-discrimination standard for workers in Mexico. Non-discrimination, this was developed together with the Labor Secretariat and also with the then National Institute for Women and the National Council to Prevent Discrimination. These are three different agencies that merged together to draft that standard. We promote certification in workplaces, which, in addition to certifying workers, it includes training and education and gender diversity to ensure or to assure the respect and the inclusion of all those people in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you. Brazil?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Canada for organizing this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here sharing useful information and positive experience. I'd like to recognize that a couple of Brazilian initiatives have already been mentioned, so I'll be brief. I just want to share some useful tools from our perspective that can be useful. So in terms of social inclusion, the Ministry of Human Rights, through the National Secretariat for LGBTQIA+ rights, promotes strategic initiatives to ensure full citizenship. One very practical example is the program Retifica Mais, a first step toward a new life. This is a program where the federal government works with local authorities to help rectify the name and gender of transgender, and non-binary people in documents, in the understanding that having documents in hand is a first step for economic inclusion. The second one, Brazil has also created a national strategy for decent work, education, and income generation for LGBT plus people in situations of social vulnerability. And as a part of this strategy, there is the program Empodera Mais, which promotes decent work and income generation for LGBT plus people in situations of social vulnerability. Through innovative methodologies, it seeks to ensure equity in access to opportunities and create a path toward autonomy. All these plans and strategies, of course, reinforce the understanding that without social inclusion and full citizenship of LGBTQIA+ people, the full and inclusive economic development of the country and the continent will be compromised. Hope this is useful for the other colleagues here present. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other interventions from the core group? Uruguay. Thank you.
Buenos días. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for giving me the floor. I thank you the intervention by all the panelists. It has really been a very rich debate. And not only because they mentioned, and it was already said, and I don't want to take too much time, but I think it's very important that all civil society and all the participants have the right to speak and have their views heard. But I simply would like to recall that Uruguay has enacted a law on October 26, 2018, which is a comprehensive law for trans persons, and it's a great advance for Uruguay in the protection and access to rights of one of the most vulnerable groups. That law, in its Article 12, it creates a labor or work quota for trans people, thus seeking with this measure to repair the historical inequities that have limited their work opportunities and also opportunities to develop themselves. Also, and upon taking up that responsibility, the work at the National Civil Society, there has been, it has created a guideline to develop a quota policy for all the people, so that all the public institutions in the country know how to recruit these people, how to make sure that they have a safe space at work, and so they can develop all their abilities and skills, because it has been said here, what is important is to develop the career path and whatever work they're going to be performing, regardless of their gender identity. Uruguay is convinced that the right way of implementing this standard and this law, even though we still have a lot left to do, because this Article 12, as I was saying, establishes a 1% of a quota. It's a 1% for the trans population, but even though we haven't been able to reach that 1% of that quota, so we're still working on it to reach that goal. But in reality, it is difficult to generate the culture and to create that social change that will really have a true impact, as it should be, as we expect. So that, and I don't like the word, that we can make it more naturalized. But in other words, that we can overcome all those affirmative action that we can carry on at the state level. In Uruguay, we're hoping that each person, regardless of their gender identity, will be able to develop fully and also to be fully members of the society, and to contribute. And based on that guideline, which is a very simple one, modest one, I believe that we're taking a step forward to the completion of that goal, thus strengthening our institutions and making a more fair future for all. Thank you.
So much. Are there any other core group members? I would just note that we have heard a number of models. I'm thinking about you, Special Rapporteur here, that we've heard a number of offers to share models and of surveys, of laws, of policies, of guidelines, of implementation and programs. And I think it could be quite interesting to think about a collection of some of these for sharing out from the core group, and maybe it perhaps might be a joint project. I know it's not my role as moderator to suggest or go beyond just recognizing the ideas that others have shared, that it could be really quite valuable in keeping with the commitments of the OAS. We have just a brief amount of time if any civil society in the room would like to share their thoughts. Not putting pressure on the particular civil society colleague at the table. It's not necessary if you would like to. Okay. In light of the time, and I know we still have closing remarks to come, let me just turn back then to our panelists and ask you, I think, I will time you for less than a minute, actually, so maybe just a couple of short sentences if you have any last thoughts that you would like to share. And I'll begin again with Undersecretary Landeta.
Thank you very much. Once again, simply to underline to make a call on the member states so we can take those successful practices to give visibility, to generate more data, and to develop public policy. What is not named does not exist. That's what is important and necessary to be able to work ongoing coordination and cooperation with civil society and the government to give visibility to those populations who have been discriminated against historically, to go from the discourse to involve all the actors in order to involve and all the actors and achieve good development in each one of the countries. Thank you.
The Special Rapporteur, Paloma Lentes.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Yes, something that is fundamental to mention here has to do with the will of the Human Rights Commission of implementing all the mechanisms, our willingness, that is, to implement everything that has been said about the rights of LGBTQ plus people. This means giving a priority as this theme, as we have done through the special rapporteur, because we have specific rapporteurship at the Human Rights Commission to work on the rights of these communities, and so that it will become part of the agenda of other rapporteurships, especially the other rapporteurship that we have, the special rapporteur and social, cultural, and environmental rights. So there is a convergence of all this, and we're working on that. The other thing is, and it has a lot to do with the giving visibility to these persons, and it has to do with involving not only the issue of lack of rights, but also implementing, giving more access, and also not only involving the people, but also monitoring by the Commission. And this is the work that we do at the Human Rights Commission through our rapporteurs. And this had led to the production of thematic reports that are very specific, and the convergence of economic and social, cultural, environmental rights and LGBTQ plus populations, but also making pronouncements, press releases, promotional statements, and technical assistance. And finally, to mention the importance that other mechanisms, such as the case-based system that we have and precautionary measures, are important when it comes to providing protection of these people, especially the people that are working, defending human rights, working for the rights, and to give protection and visibility and more rights to this specific group and of other vulnerable groups on which there are important convergences, and they're also and also make this all these small groups of minorities very vulnerable. So the Commission, at the Commission, our main focus is to implement everything else. Not only we have expressed it, not only by creating specific rapporteurships, but also making it to cross-cutting this in our work throughout in every area, including the special rapporteurships. Thank you.
Fantastic. You might have noticed that I gave the special rapporteur more time. Perhaps that was in exchange for my offering a suggestion of some additional work that he might take on going forward. I'm now resetting my timer, and Faye Johnstone, I will turn it back to you for your last couple of sentences.
Perfect. Thank you. I would simply highlight the moment that we're in and the importance of leaning in. When I look even on the domestic level in Canada, I'm concerned about the trends when it comes to human rights, public acceptance, and acceptance of visibility of queer and trans people. And I'm very concerned about the trajectory we're on. And so there is a role of international organizations. There's a role for governments, for civil society, and for the private sector to lean into this moment, to understand that there is a threat here that isn't just jeopardizing the economic opportunities and prosperity of trans people, but of the full 2S LGBTQ or LGBTQI plus community, and to understand that that is a threat to a healthy democracy, to human rights frameworks, and economic prosperity, both for the communities in question and for communities well beyond. And to understand that this isn't a moment where we can, look at our past and rest on our laurels. But there is urgency to this because both lives are at stake, human rights are at stake, and the ability for us to continue on this journey and redress our legacies of discrimination. That is the question that we are facing today, and we need to be ready to answer it with a full-throated defense of queer and trans people's human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faye Johnstone. Really helpful and powerful. Kenita Placide.
I think as we continue to move and shift the realities for LGBT persons, continuing to be visibility is one thing. To be visible is one thing. However, I think as organizations committed to community on the ground who actually feels the impact of everything that we do and government and private sector, I think it's to continue to represent them, to continue empowering them, continue to be able to create those opportunities that allows them to thrive. And that includes continued mediation through schools to ensure that they can actually go to school, creating support systems that allows them to get that psychosocial support. And also kind of pulling back the blame from the victims. Not everybody has to be resilient in order to survive. Creating equal opportunities should not have to have everybody being resilient. And so also taking that kind of aspect and bringing that kind of work down to the grassroots, but reminding persons in power, more importantly, that you got into power because people gave you opportunities, people believe in you, and therefore giving back is also something we should do. Let's play it forward today. Play it forward by giving that opportunity, by creating those chances, and more importantly, speak to communities that actually got you to where you are.
Thank you, Kenita. That is
product. Governments, we vote for you. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
it's a rough table.
Thank you so much. Beautifully put. Let me turn to you, Gabriel de la Cruz Soler, for a last minute, and then we will have closing remarks.
Muchas gracias. Recordar que de la última.
Thank you so much. Just to remember that according to the last indicator, by the 98% of the Fortune 500 companies in the world have gender policies in order to protect their workers. In our survey that we conducted in South America, we found that 8 out of 10 workers LGBTQ+ working in those companies, Fortune 500, would recommend those people from those communities to join those companies, which means that it will improve the opportunity for people having the most talent and skills. It means that the different workers will not only contribute to the company and the growth of the economy and of the company, because workers will feel more comfortable, so will become more productive, and that works. Diversity is an initiative. They do work. Diversity programs is go back to the business case as a human rights case. That's a new challenge that we have in the countries in Latin America. Thank you.
Perfect. A really perfect closeout for us. Thank you so much. I was about to thank Canada for its leadership in enabling us to have this really outstanding conversation, Ambassador Savage and Canada's representative. So I'll turn it to Canada, and then we will have remarks from the U.S. Special Envoy.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm so sorry to take the floor. I just want to give you your space for your final comments. Just wanted to thank you, Suzanne, for everything you have done, for your dedication and commitment to this process. I think we have achieved a lot since you have been also part of this process since last year. I'm personally very sad to see you go, and I wish you a lot of success in your future endeavor. I know you're going back to teaching, and I'm sure that people will be very happy to have you back as a teacher. You're an amazing teacher, I must say. I have learned a great deal with you along this, and thank you again. And just one comment, maybe a recommendation for going further. I know that we have great conversations among us, but as was mentioned, maybe the Commission would consider following up on this and perhaps involving additional stakeholders from the private sector, because these are the people we need to speak to. And of course, Canada stands ready to help as we can. Thank you so much again for everything.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And the reason I gave a thumbs up is that actually I would be, when I'm back in my academic capacity, I will always be back, happy to if you were to ask me back, I would jump at the opportunity to join you here. I know I think there's video keyed up, is that right, for our closing remarks from my colleague, our Special Envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI+ persons at the U.S. State Department, Jessica Stern. Here she is, and she'll speak with you.
Good afternoon, colleagues, friends, and allies. My name is Jessica Stern, and I'm the U.S. Special Envoy to advance the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex persons. It is an honor to join you virtually as we conclude this vital roundtable, Opening Doors, Growing Economies, the Benefits of Inclusion for Economic Development in the Americas. I very much wish I could have been there with you in person, but I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to share these closing reflections. I'd like to start by thanking Canada for its leadership as chair of the OAS LGBTI core group. Ambassador Savage, your dedication and vision have ensured that this roundtable addressed the critical issues with both urgency and depth. I also extend my wholehearted gratitude to the OAS Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity for its unwavering support in organizing this event and advancing our shared mission. And to all participants, your contributions today matter deeply. The voices, ideas, and commitments shared here will help shape the next steps in our collective journey toward a more inclusive hemisphere. Today's conversations reflect a universal truth. Inclusion is more than a goal. It is a foundation for justice, resilience, and progress. As President Biden has often reminded us, equality is not just an aspiration, it is an obligation. Our shared commitment to ensuring that LGBTQI+ persons have the opportunities and protections they deserve speaks to the very heart of democracy and human dignity. Reflecting on my work across the Americas, I'm reminded of a trip I took to Panama, where I had the privilege of meeting with LGBTQI activists working locally. They spoke of the barriers they faced, not just in the workplace, but in education and accessing basic services for LGBTQI+ Panamanians. They also shared stories of resilience and change, including leadership and entrepreneurship training they delivered to help LGBTQI+ individuals secure greater economic agency over their own lives. These stories reinforce the importance of economic opportunity and security as a transformative tool for equity and justice. As we close today's event, I want to highlight the significance of legacy to our conversation today, both the legacy we inherit and the legacy we leave behind. Sylvia Rivera, a veteran of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising, in many ways embodied the fight for justice and equality for the most marginalized. Her commitment to ensuring that no one is left behind continues to inspire us today. As we reflect on her contributions, we are reminded that the Americas too have our own powerful advocates and movements that challenge injustice and advance equality. The work of Sylvia and others teaches us that progress is not linear. It requires persistence, collaboration, and courage. Looking ahead, 2025 offers unparalleled opportunities to amplify these efforts. The OAS General Assembly in Antigua and Barbuda, the 10th Summit of the Americas in the Dominican Republic, and World Pride in Washington, D.C. itself. These events are all key platforms to showcase inclusion and build partnerships that drive real change. These events remind us that the pursuit of human rights is global and in scope, but deeply personal in impact. I want to emphasize that economic inclusion is central to this mission. It is not only a matter of fairness, but a matter of necessity. When we create systems that ensure everyone can participate fully in the workforce, we unlock human potential, drive innovation, and strengthen economies. But this work requires action. Policies that dismantle systematic barriers, data that informs decision-making, and partnerships that bring diverse voices to the table. In closing, let us recommit to the vision that brought us together, a region where everyone, regardless of who they are or whom they love, has the opportunity to thrive. Let today's roundtable inspire us to act boldly, collaborate widely, and push forward toward a future that reflects the dignity and potential of all people. Thank you, and I look forward to continuing this vital work together.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have concluded what was a very rich and substantial roundtable. I'd like in particular to again thank the U.S. delegation for their excellent work in making this possible today. In particular, the contributions of Andrew, I know who's been leading for quite a while to develop and pull together such great speakers with such broad experience from both officialdom and the front lines of the LGBTQI plus fight for rights. Thank you, Susan, for your wonderful contributions, and echo my colleague Maude's best wishes for next steps, and you're always welcome, I think, amongst us here at the core group. And the panelists, Javier and Christian in Ecuador, for representing a perspective that can inform and guide us in terms of policy. But again, I think fundamentally the most important for us, I think as officials, as diplomats, is to keep in touch with the reality of folks and the reality of how LGBTQI plus individuals and communities are living our rights in this hemisphere and where we can make progress. So the voices of Gabrielle, Faye, and Kanita in particular, I think were very important to have with us today. Thank you one and all. We'll be in touch again with you soon about our next iteration in our work program for the OAS LGBTQI plus core group. We can't do it without you, so thank you for your support. Gracias. Tengan un buen día.
Have a nice day. Thank you.